Today on Vintage HLC Show and Tell, we're going to look at some Mexican-themed decalware made by Homer Laughlin in the late 1930s and all the way through to the 1960s. So we're going to start with Mexicana, probably one of the most common of these treatments. So this is a trade advertisement for Mexicana. It's from the Pottery, Glass, and Brass Salesman, a trade journal from May of 1938. And it's titled Homer Laughlin Mexicana, the pattern that started a vogue. And it's showing it on Century up top and Kitchen Craft at the bottom. So I just want to look at one paragraph on this write-up. When this Homer Laughlin pattern was first exhibited last July, which would be July of 1937, at the House Furnishing Show, it was an immediate smash hit. Its popularity has grown steadily ever since, and retailers have found it a constant and dependable source of profit. It started the vogue for Mexican motif and crockery decoration, which has swept the country since. So what they're talking about there are all the other potteries that used Mexican-themed decals. And that includes potteries like Taylor Smith & Taylor, the Edwin Knowles China Company, W.S. George, Harker Pottery, Mount Clemens, and Crown Potteries, and many others. So they all had their own shapes and their own decals. Every once in a while you'll find a piece that's not marked, and it's often confused as a Homer Laughlin piece, but just know that there were many potteries who had their own versions of Mexicana. I'm going to look at some treatment numbers for Mexicana. We have 4 of them from Nautilus eggshell. In fact, Mexicana originates on the Nautilus eggshell shape. We closely associate it with Century, but it's actually Nautilus eggshell, the first instance, and 1524 with blue trim. Then we have 4 of them with Century, and each of these have red, blue, green, and yellow trim. They were meant to coordinate with Fiesta, solid colored dinnerware, to create the Fiesta ensemble set. So if you want to know more about those, look at video number 113. Then we see it on swing eggshell, Kitchen Craft with red trim. There's also a Kitchen Craft with blue trim, but I don't know its treatment number. And we have Modern Farmer, MF24 with red trim. So our blue trim Nautilus eggshell, we have a treatment here. You can see how the shadows have faded. We'll compare that very quickly to a Century piece. You can see the dark blue shadows in this one, but this one's heavily used and has faded out. The trim has also started to fade. The back stamp, we see the eggshell Nautilus marking with a 1937 date code. And it's rather unusual to have all this information in a marking, but below it, it says N1524, that's the official treatment number. Butler Brothers, that indicates this was made for Butler Brothers in their wholesale catalogs. And then we see the treatment name Mexicana underneath. So there's a lot of information on this back stamp. Don't expect to find that with other back stamps. That's rather unusual. Now we'll look at some other shapes. Well, first of all, here's another piece of eggshell Nautilus with blue trim, 36's bowl. And this is from 1939. Kitchen Craft cake plate with red trim. This is daisy chain oven serve. See the daisy chain embossing. There's your oven serve marking. Typically you do not see Mexicana or the other Mexican themed decals on embossed oven serve. This is one of the exceptions. If you want to know more about daisy chain and handy Andy oven serve, that's video 116. Century, vellum glaze, blue trim. So we can look at that treatment number. That is C229. This comes from 1938. Kitchen Craft mixing bowl with Mexicana and red trim. This one has a gold stamp on the back. For R.B. Broyles Furniture Company of Birmingham, Alabama. We're going to see that again in a moment on some pieces of Hacienda. There would have been a set of 3 as a promotion. Kitchen Craft shakers with blue trim. Century Sugar and Creamer with red trim. These come from 1942. Embossed oven serve, pie lifter, and spoon. There also would have been a fork. These were picked up and used with kitchen craft, of course. There's your rose and poppy oven serve embossing on the handles. And a kitchen craft covered casserole. So the next one we're going to look at is Hacienda. And this one originates on Nautilus ivory. So it's somewhat of a farm scene. There's your Nautilus ivory back stamp from 1951. And we can look at the treatment numbers for Hacienda. The Nautilus ivory is N363 with red line. Then we see 4 of them with swing eggshell with red, blue, green, and yellow, again to go with Fiesta Ensemble sets. And Century with red, blue, green, and yellow, again Fiesta Ensemble sets. Although any of these could be sold as standalones. For example, the Century with red line could have been sold without the Fiesta red. In fact, more often it was. Here's a Century platter, vellum glaze with red trim. Century sauce boat from 1942. Creamer, 1938. And a couple more of those promotional bowls from that furniture store in Birmingham, Alabama. But what's interesting about these is they're dated 1961, which is pretty late for this decal. Here's the large one. Again, just like the Mexicana version, there would have been 3 sizes of these, the 10-inch, the 8-inch, and the 6-inch. This one's dated 1961 as well. So that is a little bit about Hacienda. Then we have Conchita. So we'll look at the treatment numbers for Conchita. There's not as many. Conchita, we have S129 with red line. That was actually sold through JCPenney. C245, that's Century with red line. KK, that's Kitchen Craft. And then Handy Andy HAS 25. So here's swing eggshell. This treatment originates on swing eggshell. We see this is from 1938, and it's marked Conchita with its treatment name. And it's somewhat interesting to note that, these patterns, Mexicana originates with Nautilus eggshell. Hacienda originates with Nautilus ivory, and Conchita originates on swing eggshell, but we usually associate them with Century. Here's a Century piece from 1939, again with the treatment name. So this is the one, Conchita on Century, that was usually carried by JCPenney. Conchita Kitchen Craft casserole. And a Conchita Handy Andy casserole. So this has a plain base, would have had a metal frame to go with it, marked Handy Andy oven serve. And it has a daisy chain lid, or a modified daisy chain lid. This is treatment HAS 25. If you want to know more about this particular casserole, which was a special order, that is video number 116. So those are your 3 major Mexican themed decals. Again, that's Mexicana, Hacienda, and Conchita. But there were others. For example, this one with the sleeping Mexican. I think Huxford's coined this one Mexicana. Its treatment number W440 is an exclusive for Woolworths, and it uses the Yellowstone shape with vellum glaze and red trim. And this is from 1942. In rare instances, you can find this on Fiesta Old Ivory. Here we see the cable egg cups with the same decal treatment. Vellum glaze, there's the large sprig. And this one has the small sprig. Actually, it has both. You just have to turn them around. And then there's Pueblo. So look at the treatment numbers for Pueblo. There's that Mexicana WW440. And Pueblo, we see S102 with red line, and then some Century. These were meant to go with solid colored Fiesta ware. So we have 5 of them. There's also, of course, Kitchen Craft with Pueblo. And it's a series of decals. We see the basket weaver on the swing eggshell piece, 1938. The cookie jar. He's weaving a blanket there. And on the other side, I think it's a basket weaver as well. Yeah. So that's your large covered jar, sometimes called a cookie jar. Pie plate. I believe this is daisy chain. It is. So you see that familiar daisy chain embossing with the oven served marking. And then we see this version of a sleeping Mexican. Generally, these were decorated by outside firms. We see it on quite a bit of different Homer Laughlin wares. Here it is on Virginia Rose. This is swing eggshell with encasing lines along the rim. This one actually has a Vogue back stamp, indicating that somebody else decorated this ware. So Homer Laughlin would have made the blank. This one doesn't have a secondary mark. This comes from 1944. But chances are it probably was decorated by an outside company. And this one is called Bench. Usually you see this on other companies. I think Edwin M. Knowles, I think, used this one. And this may have been decorated by an outside company as well, because it's rather unusual for Homer Laughlin in this time of the late 1930s and early 40s to put red trim on the edge. Generally, they would decorate Century with red trim on the verge, or on the inside of the rim. But here it is on the outside. So if Homer Laughlin would have decorated something like this, these decals would have been moved more towards the inner well, and then there would have been red trim here, and then some red lines on these handles. So I don't think Homer Laughlin decorated this. I could be wrong, however. It's not even marked, but it is the Century shape with the vellum glaze. So one last thing to mention, and that's this book by Melicity. It's called Beyond Mexicana, A Collector's Guide to Mexican Decal Dinnerware. And inside, there are all kinds of pictures and information about Mexican-themed ware by other companies. Well, there's some child sets. Let's see. There's some fabrics, there's linens, there's a lamp, there's tins. There's an Hacienda bell that was featured in Huxford's book originally, if I'm not mistaken. There's some glassware. Here's some by Taylor Smith & Taylor. In fact, there's the Mexicana decal by Homer Laughlin on a TS&T cup. Some Universal, some Mount Clemens, Edwin M. Knowles, Harker. But this is a pretty good reference. You see all the different types of decals and how they were used, different trim colors, different shapes. So if you're into this ware, this is a good book to get. Again, Beyond Mexicana, A Collector's Guide to Mexican Decal Dinnerware. So I think that's going to be it for now.